Ali Baba and the 40 Thieves. There once lived in a town of Persia 2 brothers, one named Qasim and the other Ali Baba. Their father divided a small inheritance equally between them. Qasim married a very rich wife and became a wealthy merchant. Ali Baba married a woman as poor as himself, and lived by cutting wood and bringing it upon 3 asses into town to sell. One day, when Ali Baba was in the forest and had just cut wood enough to load his asses, he saw at a distance a great cloud of dust, which seemed to approach him. He observed it with attention, and distinguished soon after a body of horsemen, who he suspected might be robbers. He determined to leave his asses and save himself. He climbed up a large tree planted on a high rock, whose branches were thick enough to conceal him, and yet enabled him to see all that passed without being discovered. The troop, who were to the number of 40, all well mounted and armed, came to the foot of the rock on which the tree stood, and there dismounted. Every man unbridled his horse, tied him to some shrub, and hung about his neck a bag of corn which they brought behind them. Then each of them took off his saddlebag, which seemed to Ali Baba to be full of gold and silver from its weight. One, whom he took to be their captain, came under the tree in which Ali Baba was concealed, and, making his way through some shrubs, pronounced these words, "Open, sesame!" As soon as the captain of the robbers had thus spoken, a door opened in the rock, and after he had made all his troops enter before him, he followed them, when the door shut itself again. The robbers stayed some time within the rock, during which Ali Baba, fearful of being caught, remained in the tree. At last the door opened again, and as the captain went in last, so he came out first, and stood to see them all pass by him. When Ali Baba heard him make the door close while pronouncing these words, "Shut, sesame!" every man at once went and bridled his horse, fastened his wallet, and mounted again. When the captain saw them all ready, he put himself at their head, and they returned the way they had come. Ali Baba followed them with his eyes as far as he could see them, and afterward stayed a considerable time before he descended. Remembering the words of the captain of the robbers used to cause the door to open and shut, he had the curiosity to try if his pronouncing them would have the same effect. Accordingly, he went among the shrubs, and, perceiving the door concealed behind them, stood before it and said, "Open, sesame!" The door instantly flew wide open. Ali Baba, who expected a dark, dismal cavern, was surprised to see a well-lighted and spacious chamber, which received the light from an opening at the top of the rock, and in which were all sorts of provisions. Rich bales of silk, brocade, and valuable carpeting piled upon one another, gold and silver ingots in great heaps, and money in bags. The sight of all these riches made him suppose that this cavern must have been occupied for ages by robbers, who had succeeded one another. Ali Baba went boldly into the cave, and collected as much of the gold, which was in bags, as he thought his 3 asses could carry. When he had loaded them with the bags, he laid wood over them in such a manner that they could not be seen. When he had passed in and out as often as he wished, he stood before the door, and, pronouncing the words, "Shut, sesame!" the door closed of itself. He then made the best of his way into town. When Ali Baba got home, he drove his asses into a little yard, shut the gate very carefully, threw off the wood that covered the panniers, carried the bags into his house, and ranged them in order before his wife. He then emptied the bags, which raised such a great heap of gold as dazzled his wife's eyes, and then he told her the whole adventure from beginning to end, and, above all, recommended her to keep it secret. The wife rejoiced greatly in their good fortune, and would count all the gold piece by piece. "Wife," replied Ali Baba, "you do not know what you undertake. When you pretend to count the money, you will never have it done. I will dig a hole and bury it. There's no time to be lost." "You are right, husband," replied she, "but let us know as nigh as possible how much we have. I'll borrow a small measure and measure it while you dig the hole." Away the wife ran to her brother-in-law Qasim, who lived just by, and addressing herself to his wife, desired her to lend her a measure for a little while. Her sister-in-law asked whether she would have a great one or a small one. The other asked for a small one. She bade her stay a little, and she would readily fetch one. The sister-in-law did so, but as she knew Ali Baba's poverty, she was curious to know what sort of grain his wife wanted to measure, and artfully putting some sweat at the bottom of the measure, brought it to her, with an excuse that she was sorry that she had made her stay so long, but she could not find it sooner. Ali Baba's wife went home, set the measure upon the heap of gold, filled it, and emptied it often upon the sofa, till she had done, when she was very well satisfied to find the number of measures amounted to so many as they did, and went to tell her husband, who had almost finished digging the hole. While Ali Baba was burying the gold, his wife, to show her exactness and diligence to her sister-in-law, carried the measure back again, but without taking notice that a piece of gold had stuck to the bottom. "Sister," said she, giving it to her again, "you see that I have not kept your measure long. I am obliged to you for it, and return it with thanks." As soon as Ali Baba's wife had gone, Cassim's wife looked to the bottom of the measure, and was in inexpressible surprise to find a piece of gold sticking to it. Envy immediately possessed her breast. "What?" said she. "Has Ali Baba gold so plentiful as to measure it? Whence has he all this wealth?" Cassim, her husband, was at his counting house. When he came home, his wife said to him, "Cassim, I know you think yourself rich, but Ali Baba is infinitely richer than you. He doesn't count his money, but measures it." Cassim desired her to explain the riddle, which she did, by telling him the stratagem she had used to make the discovery, and showed him the piece of money, which was so old that they could not tell in what prince's reign it was coined. Cassim, after he had married the rich widow, had never treated Ali Baba as a brother, but neglected him, and now, instead of being pleased, he conceived a base envy at his brother's prosperity. He could not sleep all that night, and went to him in the morning before sunrise. "Ali Baba," said he, "I am surprised at you. You pretend to be miserably poor, yet you measure gold. My wife found this at the bottom of the measure you borrowed yesterday." By this discourse, Ali Baba perceived Cassim and his wife, through his own wife's folly, to know what he had so much reason to conceal, but what was done could not be undone. Therefore, without showing the least surprise or trouble, he confessed all, and offered his brother part of his treasure to keep the secret. "I expected as much," replied Cassim haughtily, "but I must know exactly where this treasure is, and how I may visit it myself when I choose. Otherwise, I will go and inform against you, and you will not only get no more, but you will lose all that you have, and I shall have a share for my information." Ali Baba told him all he had desired, even to the very words he had used to gain admission into the cave. Cassim rose the next morning long before the sun, and set out for the forest with 10 mules bearing great chests, which he designed to fill, and followed the road which Ali Baba had pointed out to him. He was not long before he reached the rock, and found out the place by the tree and the other marks which his brother had given him. When he reached the entrance of the caravan, he pronounced the words, "Open, Sesame!" The door immediately opened, and, when he was in, closed upon him. In examining the cave, he was in great admiration to find much more riches than he had expected from Ali Baba's relation. He quickly laid as many bags of gold as he could carry at the door of the cavern, but his thoughts were so full of the great riches he should possess that he could not think of the necessary word to make it open, but instead of sesame, said, "Open, barley!" and was much amazed to find that the door remained fast shut. He named several sorts of grain, but still the door would not open. Cassim had never expected such an incident, and was so alarmed at the danger he was in, that the more he endeavored to remember the word sesame, the more his memory was confounded, and he had as much forgotten it as if he had never heard it mentioned. He threw down the bags he had loaded himself with, and walked distractedly up and down the cave, without having the least regard to the riches that were around him. About noon the robbers visited their cave, and at some distance they saw Cassim's mules straggling about the rock, with great chests on their backs. Alarmed at this, they galloped full speed to the cave. They drove away the mules, which strayed through the forest so far that they were soon out of sight, and went directly, with their naked sabres in their hands, to the door, which, on their captain's pronouncing the proper words, immediately opened. Cassim, who heard the noises of the horses' feet, at once guessed the arrival of the robbers, and resolved to make one effort for his life. He rushed to the door, and no sooner saw the door open than he ran out and threw the leader down, but he could not escape the other robbers, who, with their scimitars, soon deprived him of life. The first care of the robbers after this was to examine the cave. They found all the bags which Cassim had brought to the door to be ready to load his mules, and carried them again to their places, but they did not miss what Ali Baba had taken away before. Then, holding a council, and deliberating upon this occurrence, they guessed that Cassim, when he was in, could not get out again. But they could not imagine how he had learned the secret words by which alone he could enter. They could not deny the fact of his being there, and to terrify any person or accomplice who should attempt the same thing, they agreed to cut Cassim's body into 4 quarters, to hang 2 on one side and 2 on the other, within the door of the cave. They had no sooner taken this resolution than they put it in execution, and when they had nothing more to detain them, left the place of their hoards well closed. They mounted their horses, went to beat the roads again, and to attack caravans they might meet. In the meantime, Cassim's wife was very uneasy when night came, and her husband was not returned. She ran to Ali Baba in great alarm, and said, "I believe, brother-in-law, that you know Cassim has gone to the forest, and upon what account. It is now night, and he has not returned, and I am afraid some misfortune has happened to him." Ali Baba told her that she need not frighten herself, for that certainly Cassim would not think it proper to come into the town till night should be pretty far advanced. Cassim's wife, considering how much it concerned her husband to keep his business secret, was the more easily persuaded to believe her brother-in-law. She went home again, and waited patiently till midnight. Then her fear redoubled, and her grief was more sensible, because she was forced to keep it to herself. She repented of her foolish curiosity, and cursed her desire to pry into the affairs of her brother and sister-in-law. She spent all the night in weeping, and as soon as it was day, went to telling them by her tears the cause of her coming. Ali Baba did not wait for his sister-in-law to tell him to go see what was become of Cassim, but departed immediately with his 3 asses, begging of her first to moderate her affliction. He went to the forest, and when he came near the rock, having seen neither his brother nor the mules in the way, was seriously alarmed at finding some blood spilled near the door, which he took for an ill omen. But when he had pronounced the word, the door had opened. He was struck with a horror at the dismal sight of his brother's body. He was not long in determining how he should pay the last dues to his brother, but without advertising to the little fraternal affection he had shown for him, went into the cave to find something to enshroud his remains, and having loaded one of his asses with them, covered them over with wood. The other 2 asses he loaded with bags of gold, covering them with wood also as before, and then bidding the door shut, came away, but was so cautious as to stop some time at the end of the forest, that he might not go into town before night. When he came home, he drove the 2 asses loaded with gold into his little yard, and left the care of unloading them to his wife, while he led the other back to his sister-in-law's house. Ali Baba knocked at the door, which was opened by Morgana, a clever, intelligent slave, who was fruitful in inventions to meet the most difficult circumstances. When he came into the court, he unloaded the ass, and taking Morgana aside, said to her, "You must observe an unavoidable secrecy. Your master's body is contained in these 2 panniers. We must bury him as if he had died a natural death. Go now and tell your mistress. I leave the matter to your wit and skillful devices." Ali Baba helped to place the body in Cassim's home, again recommended to Morgan to act her part well, and then returned with his ass. Morgana went out early the next morning to a druggist, and asked for a sort of lozenge which was considered effectuous in the most dangerous disorders. The apothecary inquired who was ill. She replied, with a sigh, "My good master Cassim himself, and that he could neither eat nor speak." In the evening, Morgana went to the same druggist again, with tears in her eyes, asked for an essence which they had used to give sick people, only with it the last extremity. "Alas," she said, taking it from the apothecary, "I am afraid that this remedy will have no better effect than the lozenges, and that I shall lose my good master." On the other hand, as Ali Baba and his wife were often seen to go between Cassim's and their own house that day, and to seem melancholy, nobody was surprised in the evening to hear the lamentable shrieks and cries of Cassim's wife and Morgana, who gave out everywhere that her master was dead.